All right, folks. So a few years ago, I finished my master's in creativity studies, and ever since then, I've pretty much been in love with and obsessed with the whole concept of the creative process. And part of the reason that I love it is it's a way that I think really helps everyone to wrap their head around the concept of creativity, why it matters, and start to understand how they can actually apply that to their own life. Even if you feel like you aren't particularly creative, you can start to embrace the creative process, which will hopefully help you come up with some more creative ideas. So this is going to be like a mini crash course lesson just to give you the general idea of what it is and start to think about how you can actually use it. So here we go. Maybe Prezi. There we go. Next one. Okay, so this step I actually kind of made up and added in. The formal creative process has been researched, created, and written about by Graham Wallace, but I think that this is a really important part that isn't really talked about a lot. So I call it feed your brain, and the basic idea of that is you have to be putting new information into your brain on a fairly regular basis to be able to come up with new solutions and new answers to problems. So feeding your brain does not necessarily mean just sitting in front of the television. In fact, that's not really a super effective way. So some ways that I feed my brain, especially that are really related to my career as an art teacher and as a textile designer. So I will spend some time on Instagram. I follow a lot of other artists and designers, so that gives me inspiration. Spending time on Pinterest. So putting a lot of visual information into my brain. Spending time reading articles and blogs, going for walks, but going into different neighborhoods with different groups of people, different socioeconomic statuses, different architecture, traveling. All of those things are different ways of feeding your brain. So it doesn't have to be if you're a writer, you don't always just have to be reading books. You can be feeding your brain in many different ways that ends up giving your brain information to make future connections. It also makes me feel a lot less guilty about spending time on Instagram and or Pinterest. However, I do still limit that and normally set a timer so that I don't waste tons of time. So this is my first kind of made up step called feed your brain, but I think it's an important one. So the real official first step that I'm making step 1.5 because I can is called preparation. So the idea of preparation is that moment when you realize that there is a problem to solve or when you have a question that you need an answer to. Now, it is important to form your problem in the form of a question. So if your problem is, maybe there's too much trash on your street. So I'm just thinking about that because there's too much trash on my street. And so you're thinking about the fact that you want there to be less litter, you want people to actually pick up their trash or just to not even throw their trash on the ground. So just making a blanket statement of, I wish the streets of my neighborhood were cleaner, that's just kind of like, yeah, don't we all? Move on. If instead I rephrase that and I ask I could ask, how can I make my streets cleaner? What would encourage people not to litter? Those are things that really, as you start to phrase questions, if you pay attention, you should actually even be able to notice the shift in how your brain responds to that. So the first, just making a statement of, I wish there was less litter on the streets of my neighborhood, just kind of gets a blah, yeah, great. When I flip that and say, how could I make the streets of my neighborhood cleaner? Or what would inspire people to litter less? Instantaneously, I can feel that my brain is starting to try to answer that question. It's trying to solve that problem. It doesn't mean right away the first ideas are good ideas. It doesn't mean they're creative ideas, but my brain is starting to take action. So we're going to jump on to the next step. Step number 2 is incubation, and this is probably like the easiest and best part. Incubation is the time where your brain knows there's a problem. We've already let it know. We've asked it a question. And now we go and do something else and are giving our brain some time on more of a subconscious level to just make connections. And this is why feeding our brain is important. So it has more and more information to pull from in making those connections. So my very first response when I asked that question to myself of how can I make the streets in my neighborhood cleaner, my first gut response is I could go pick up the trash, which most definitely that is something I can do. That is something I do, but it's not necessarily a creative solution. Maybe there is, goodness, sorry about that. My computer telling me I'm supposed to do other things than be talking to you, but we're going to ignore that. So me going out and picking up trash is a solution, but it might not be the most creative solution. There might be other ideas and solutions that I can come up with. So an important thing to do is really pay attention. And that's something that a lot of us miss. Our brains are coming up with a lot of ideas and we aren't paying attention to them. So I have this wonderful thing that I call an everything book that I carry with me everywhere. And I just jot down ideas and questions, all kinds of crazy things in it. But that really helps me to remember ideas, and it's giving my ideas some credit. So you do need to pay attention to the things that come up. So like I said, during incubation, you can be doing other things. It's not like you have to be sitting on your couch just saying the question over and over and over and over again. It is a great time to daydream if you're a big daydreamer. It's also, if it's something that you really want to speed up the process, it is really helpful if you move. But if you're not moving and you don't want to do really strenuous movement. So going for a walk, a jog, for an easy swim, for a bike ride, if you like to dance, if you like to do yoga, those are all really great things to do. So if you want to be really intentional, you can go ahead, write down a question that you have related to a problem that you want to solve, and then go do your workout for the day. I do encourage you to actually write the question down. It's more effective if you write it down for several reasons. So one, if you don't come up with a solution right away, having it written down lets you see it and continually remind your brain, hey, we still need to work on this problem. We still need to answer this. But highly recommend movement as a way to help with the process of incubation. All right, jumping on to number 3 is that moment where you're like, holy smokes, I am brilliant. I have the answer. And we all have those moments where we're kind of like, we feel like we have this flash of genius and have no idea where did this brilliant idea come from, or we might be with a group of friends or a group of coworkers and we're like, wow, where did that even come from? How did you come up with that solution? So the first couple steps are the whole process behind this that we tend to ignore. And when we ignore them, it just doesn't happen as often. And really, we want these brilliant ideas to happen as often as possible. So illumination is acknowledging that you have an idea. It's also important during illumination that you're not really filtering your ideas. You're not saying that is stupid, that's ridiculous, that's going to cost $10,000 and I don't have $10,000. You are still being open. So when you have ideas in illumination, you also want to write those down, even if you're saying, I don't know how to make that happen. A couple reasons why that is important. So your idea even if you don't fully know how to form it, acknowledging that you don't know how to form it, it is going to spur off a whole new set of questions and be triggering the creative process all over again. So helping to give you more ideas and perhaps better, more focused questions to ask around your problem. It's also something that if you're talking to friends or family, or you work in a team or a mastermind group or in a classroom, you can share those ideas, and there might be other people around you that say, hey, one, I know how to do that, or I know somebody that knows how to do that, or your idea is going to spark an idea for someone else. So this is kind of one of those no idea is too crazy. Accept it, acknowledge it, write it down, and if it spurs more questions, write those questions down as well. And then the final step is verification. And this is another step that we often tend to skip. You actually have to try your idea. You need to put it into action. So as I said in the beginning of this, an actual problem that I would love to solve is the fact that there is trash on the streets in my neighborhood and I don't like it. So the best answer that I also could put into action right away was the idea that I could go and pick up trash. So I started doing that. I also kept track of how many bags of trash I was picking up and how much of the neighborhood I could cover. The cool thing, I realized that each time there was actually less street on the trash, because part of my hypothesis was the fact that if there is already trash on the street, it's kind of like a permission slip that says to everyone else, go ahead and chuck your trash out your window because no one cares. So I try to make it so there is not trash on the street, there is not that permission slip, and it is cutting back on the amount of trash. Is that the most creative solution? No, but it was something that I could put into place right away and start to experiment with. Since then, the city where I live has actually created an Adopt a Block program for the area that I live in, and more people are actually adopting streets and picking up trash, because the more people see other people picking up trash, the more it's kind of inspiring them. So, simple things. Some is the important part is actually trying it, seeing what happens, and then responding. So try your idea, even if it's on a scaled down, simplified form. See what happens, because again, during verification, a lot of new problems, ideas, questions are going to come up to keep the creative process going. And I've said before, but I'm going to say it one more time before I go, some of the most important things to remember. 1, make sure that you are asking a question and not making a statement. 2, write things down. If it's in a notebook, if it's on index cards, if it's on Post-it notes, write your questions down somewhere where you're actually going to see them on a fairly regular basis. And then finally, pay attention to the ideas that you have and write those down as well. We have busy lives, lots of things going on, and if we're not paying attention, then we tend to actually lose them. A quick example of that, if you listen to Elizabeth Gilbert speak at all, she talks about the idea of where do writers and where do artists actually get their ideas from. And many artists will refer to it as their muse or their own little genius, which actually comes from that idea of things happening in the incubation phase, where it is kind of on a subconscious level and we're not really paying attention. But there is, amongst many writers and artists, and Elizabeth Gilbert, I believe it is in one of her TED Talks, talks about this concept of if you have an idea and you don't pay attention to it, eventually it will leave and it will go find someone else who will pay attention to it. Most definitely, no matter kind of what you believe in the whole terms of muses coming and giving you ideas, if you don't pay attention to things, if you don't write them down, you will forget them. They will leave you. So write them down. Anyway, I hope that this has been a helpful introduction to the creative process to you, and that you can start to think about how you can actually apply this to your own life and your own work.